Some secrets stay buried. Others find their way to the surface. In her grandmother's dusty farmhouse, 12-year-old Zara discovers a locked wooden chest. No one knows what's inside. No one knows where the key is hidden. But in her dreams, a silver-haired woman points the way. What happens when family secrets refuse to stay forgotten? Zara Winters pressed her nose against the car window as they drove up the winding dirt road. The old farmhouse looked lonely on top of the hill, with its peeling white paint and dark windows that seemed to watch them coming. "That's Grandma Eloise's house?" she asked. Dad nodded, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "That's where I grew up." Zara studied her father's face. He hardly ever talked about his mom. All Zara knew was that Grandma Eloise had died 3 months ago, and they never visited her, not even once in Zara's 12 years. "Why didn't we ever come here before?" Zara asked. Mom turned around from the front seat. "Your dad and his mom didn't always get along, honey." "She was," Dad started, then stopped. "Complicated." The car crunched to a stop on the gravel driveway. The house looked even bigger up close, with 2 stories and an attic window at the very top, like a watching eye. "We have 3 days to clean this place out before the new owners take over," Dad said, grabbing boxes from the trunk. "Let's get to work." Inside, the house smelled like dust and old books. Sheets covered the furniture like ghosts. Dad pulled Fahiyut on off an old couch, sending dust dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. "You can explore if you want, Zara," Mom said, opening a box. "Just be careful on the stairs." Zara didn't need to be told twice. She climbed the creaky wooden staircase to the 2nd floor. There were 4 bedrooms, each with old-fashioned wallpaper and heavy furniture. One room had a small bed, with a faded quilt. "This must have been Dad's room," she whispered to herself. But what really caught her eye was the narrow staircase at the end of the hall. It led up to a small wooden door, the attic. The door groaned when she pushed it open. The attic was huge, stretching across the whole house. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, and dust puffed up under her feet with each step. A small round window at the far end let in a beam of light. "Wow," Zara breathed. The attic was filled with treasures. Old trunks were stacked against one wall. Bookshelves sagged under the weight of yellowed books. A rocking horse sat in one corner, and an ancient sewing machine in another. Zara walked carefully through the maze of forgotten things. This was like stepping into another time. She opened an old trunk and found quilts that smelled like mothballs. Another held Christmas ornaments, made of glass. In the far corner, something caught her eye. A small wooden chest sat on a low table. Unlike everything else in the attic, it didn't have a layer of dust. The dark wood gleamed in the sunlight, like someone had recently wiped it clean. Zara knelt beside it. The chest was about the size of a shoebox, with metal corners and a tiny lock on the front. Flowers were carved into the wood, roses with delicate petals. She tried to lift the lid, but it was locked tight. "What are you hiding?" she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. She picked up the chest. It wasn't heavy, but something inside shifted when she moved it. Curiosity burned inside her. What could be so important that Grandma Eloise kept it locked up? "Zara? Where are you?" Dad called from downstairs. "In the attic," she yelled back. "Come see what I found." She heard his heavy steps on the stairs, then his head poked through the door. "This place is exactly the same," he said, looking around with a strange expression. "She never changed a thing." "Dad, look at this," Zara said, holding up the chest. It was in the corner, and it's locked. "Do you know what's inside?" Dad crossed the attic and took the chest from her. His eyes widened. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice suddenly quiet. "Over there," Zara pointed. "What is it?" Dad sat down on an old trunk, the chest cradled in his hands like something precious. "This was Mom's special box," he said. Nobody was allowed to touch it. Not even me. He tried the lid. Still locked. She always wore the key on a chain around her neck, but it wasn't with her things at the hospital. "So nobody knows what's inside?" Zara asked. Dad shook his head. Mom had her secrets. This was her biggest one. That night, they camped out in sleeping bags on the living room floor. Mom and Dad said the bedrooms were too dusty to sleep in. As they ate sandwiches for dinner, Dad told stories about growing up in the old house. How he'd slide down the banister when his mom wasn't looking. How the kitchen sink always dripped, no matter how many times they fixed it. But he never mentioned the wooden chest again. After Mom and Dad fell asleep, Zara lay awake, listening to the old house creak and groan. Rain began to patter on the roof. Then came the distant rumble of thunder. She couldn't stop thinking about the chest. What secrets was Grandma Eloise hiding? And why didn't Dad ever talk about her? Lightning flashed, lighting up the room for a second. In that brief moment, Zara thought she saw a woman standing by the window. A tall woman with silver hair swept up in a bun. When the next flash came, the space was empty. Zara pulled her sleeping bag up to her chin, her heart pounding. As she drifted off to sleep, the thunder rumbled again. In her dreams, the silver-haired woman stood in the attic, pointing to a bookshelf with a slender finger. "Look," the woman seemed to say, though no sound came out. "Look there!" Zara woke with a start. Gray morning light filtered through the living room curtains. Mom and Dad were still asleep in their sleeping bags. The old grandfather clock in the corner read 6:15. The dream felt so real. Zara could still see the silver-haired woman pointing at the bookshelf. She rubbed her eyes and sat up quietly. "Look there," she whispered to herself. Wrapping her blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill, Zara tiptoed across the creaky floorboards to the bookshelf against the wall. It was tall, reaching almost to the ceiling, with shelves packed tight with books of all sizes. Most looked ancient, with tattered spines and faded gold lettering. Zara ran her finger along them. Cookbooks, gardening guides, novels worn from many, readings. Then she saw it. A large Bible with a dark leather cover. Something about it caught her attention. Unlike the other books, which were dusty and neglected, this Bible looked like it had been handled recently. Zara glanced back at her sleeping parents, then carefully pulled the heavy book from the shelf. It was heavier than she expected. The leather felt smooth beneath her fingers, worn from years of handling. The name Eloise Mary Winters was stamped in gold on the cover. This was Grandma Eloise's Bible. Zara carried it to the window where the light was better. She opened it carefully. The pages were thin and delicate, like butterfly wings. Some had notes written in the margins in neat handwriting. Some verses were underlined in faded ink. When she reached the middle of the Bible, Zara gasped. The center of the pages had been cut out, creating a secret hiding spot. And nestled inside was a small brass key tied to a faded blue ribbon. "Whoa," she breathed. Could this be the key to Grandma Eloise's wooden chest? The key nobody ever found? Zara's heart raced as she picked it up. The metal felt cool against her palm and surprisingly heavy for its size. "Zara? What are you doing up so early?" Mom's sleepy voice made Zara jump. She quickly closed the Bible, slipping the key into the pocket of her pajama pants. "Just looking at some books," she said, trying to sound casual as she returned the Bible to the shelf. "Well, come help me make breakfast. We've got a long day of packing ahead of us." While they ate cereal at the kitchen table, Dad announced his plans for the day. "The real estate agent wants to meet us in town at 10 U to sign some papers," he said. "We'll be gone a couple of hours," Zara perked up. "Can I stay here? I want to explore the garden." Dad hesitated. "I don't know." "Please? I'm 12 now, not a baby. And we're in the middle of nowhere. It's not like I can get into trouble." After some debate, her parents agreed she could stay behind, with strict instructions not to leave the property and to keep her phone with her. As soon as their car disappeared down the driveway, Zara raced back inside and up the 2 flights of stairs to the attic. The wooden chest sat exactly where they'd left it yesterday, on the small table in the corner. The key felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. She took it out and studied it. A simple brass key with an ornate top. Nothing special looking, but it might unlock secrets her grandmother had kept hidden for decades. Zara's hands trembled as she knelt beside the chest. She inserted the key into the tiny lock. It fit perfectly. She held her breath and turned it. There was a satisfying click as the lock opened. "Yes!" Zara whispered triumphantly. Slowly, she lifted the lid. The hinges creaked slightly. Inside, she found several items carefully arranged. On top was a stack of envelopes tied together with blue ribbon. They looked old, the edges yellowed with time. Beneath them was a small leather-bound journal, and at the bottom lay an old black and white photograph. Zara picked up the photograph first. It showed a young woman holding a baby. The woman was pretty, with dark hair pinned up and serious eyes that somehow still managed to look kind. She wasn't smiling exactly, but she gazed at the camera with a look of fierce pride. Zara turned the photo over. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "The day everything changed. My greatest joy and deepest regret." "Is this you, Grandma Eloise?" Zara whispered, studying the woman's face. "And is the baby my dad?" She set the photo aside and untied the ribbon around the letters. The top envelope was addressed simply to Ellis in the same neat handwriting. Zara carefully pulled out the letter inside. The paper was thin and crinkly with age. "My dearest Ellis," it began. "I hope someday you can forgive me for what I've done. Not a day passes that I don't think of you and wonder." The crunch of tires on gravel cut through the silence. Zara froze. Her parents were back early. She quickly gathered the items and put them back in the chest. In her rush, she forgot to remove the key from the lock. She closed the lid and hurried downstairs, her heart pounding. She made it to the living room, just as the front door opened. "We forgot the folder with the deed," Dad explained as he stepped inside. "What have you been up to?" "Nothing much," Zara said, trying to sound casual. "Just exploring." Dad gave her a strange look. "Your face is all flushed. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. Just ran down the stairs too fast. As Dad rummaged through his briefcase for the folder, Zara realized with horror that she'd left Grandma Eloise's wooden chest unlocked, with the key still in it, and she still didn't know who Ellis was. After her parents left again, Zara couldn't stop thinking about the chest and its contents. Who was Ellis? Why had Grandma Eloise written letters but apparently never sent them? And what did she mean by greatest joy and deepest regret? Zara spent the rest of the morning helping her mom sort through kitchen cabinets, all while her mind raced with questions. By late afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. "I'm going to get some fresh air," she told her mom, who was wrapping plates in newspaper. Stay close to the house, Mom reminded her. Instead of going outside, Zara snuck back up to the attic. To her dismay, the wooden chest was gone from its place on the table. Had Dad found it? Did he see the key? Panicking, she searched the attic, but the chest was nowhere to be found. Defeated, she trudged back downstairs. That evening, as they ate pizza on paper plates in the living room, Dad seemed distracted. He barely touched his food and kept checking his phone. "Everything okay, Dad?" Zara asked. "Just tired," he said, not meeting her eyes. After dinner, Mom went to take a shower. As soon as she was gone, Dad turned to Zara. "I need to show you something," he said in a low voice. "Come with me." He led her to what had once been Grandma Eloise's bedroom. There, sitting on the bed, was the wooden chest. "You moved it," Zara said. Dad nodded. "I wanted to look at it closer, in better light." He paused, studying her face. "Zara, did you open this?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I found the key." "The key?" Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. "You found it? Where?" "It was hidden in the Bible on the bookshelf downstairs, inside a secret compartment." Dad sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "I looked everywhere for that key after she died. How did you know to look there?" Zara wasn't sure how to explain her dream. "I just had a feeling." Dad picked up the chest, turning it over in his hands. "And now we can finally see what Mom kept locked away all these years." He looked up at Zara. "What's inside?" Together, they sat on the old quilt that covered the bed. Zara opened the chest and showed her father the contents, the stack of letters, the journal, and the photograph. Dad's hands shook as he picked up the photo. "That's her," he whispered. "That's my mother. And the baby is me." He stared at the words written on the back. "The day everything changed. My greatest joy and deepest regret." "What does that mean?" Zara asked. Dad shook his head. "I don't know." Next, he untied the ribbon around the letters. He pulled out the first one and began to read aloud. "My dearest Ellis, I hope someday you can forgive me for what I've done. Not a day passes that I don't think of you and wonder where you are. If you're safe, if you ever think of me. They all believe you're gone, but I know better. I feel you sometimes, watching from a distance." Dad's voice trailed off. He flipped through the stack of envelopes, all addressed to Ellis. Some were dated just months before Grandma Eloise died. "These span over 40 years, he said, sounding stunned. "She wrote to this person for 4 decades. "Who's Ellis?" Zara asked. Dad looked confused. "I have no idea. I've never heard of anyone named Ellis in our family." He opened another letter, dated 20 years ago. "Ellis, Thomas graduated from college today. He looks so much like you it takes my breath away. Sometimes when he smiles, I see you so clearly. I never told him about you. I've kept our secret all these years. Was it wrong of me? I don't know anymore." Dad's face went pale. He read the letter again, silently this time. "Looks like you," Zara said slowly. "Dad, do you think Ellis might be your real father?" Before Dad could answer, they heard Mom's footsteps in the hallway. "Thomas? Zara? Where are you guys?" Dad quickly gathered the letters and stuffed them back in the chest. "Don't mention any of this to your mother yet," he whispered urgently. "I need time to understand what it all means." "We're in here," he called out, his voice suspiciously cheerful. "Just looking at some of Mom's old things." That night, Zara couldn't sleep. She lay in her sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with questions. Who was Ellis? Was he really Dad's father? If so, what happened to him? And why had Grandma Eloise kept it a secret all these years? Around midnight, she heard movement in the living room. Peering through the darkness, she saw Dad sitting by the window with a flashlight, reading the letters one by one. Tears glistened on his cheeks in the pale light. Zara watched him for a long time. She'd never seen her father cry before. He had always been the strong one, the one who fixed things, who knew all the answers. But now, he looked lost, like a little boy who had just discovered that everything he believed about himself wasn't true. As quietly as she could, Zara slipped out of her sleeping bag and padded across the room to sit beside him. "You okay, Dad?" she whispered. He quickly wiped his eyes. "Hey, Zara Bear, you should be asleep." "So should you." He gave a small laugh. "Fair point. Did you read all the letters?" she asked. Dad nodded. "Most of them. They're all to this man. Named Ellis. From what I can piece together, they were in love when they were young. Something happened. Something bad. Her parents were involved. Ellis disappeared, and everyone thought he was dead. But he wasn't? Apparently not. At least, Mom didn't think so. She wrote like she believed he was out there somewhere. But she never sent any of these letters. She just kept writing to him, year after year, telling him about her life. About me. Why wouldn't she mail them if she thought he was alive? Dad shook his head. I don't know. Fear, maybe? Or shame? The letters hint at some kind of family scandal, but she never comes right out and says what happened. He picked up the photograph again. I always thought this was my father, he said, pointing to a framed photo on the mantel showing a stern-looking man in a suit. Gerald Winters, the man who raised me. He died when I was 15. He was a difficult man. Cold. We were never close. And now you think Ellis might be your real dad? Zara asked. Dad ran a hand through his hair. It would explain a lot. Why Gerald always seemed to resent me. Why Mom was so protective of me around him. Why I never felt like I belonged in this family. He put the letters back in the chest and closed the lid. Tomorrow we're going into town, he said. Pine Creek is small. If this Ellis person lived here 40 years ago, someone might remember him. Can I come? Dad smiled and ruffled her hair. Of course. After all, you're the one who found the key. You're part of this mystery now. As Zara finally drifted off to sleep, she wondered what secrets the small town of Pine Creek might hold, and whether they were ready to uncover them. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Mom announced she'd stay at the farmhouse to finish packing the kitchen while Dad and Zara went into town. There's so much to sort through, she said, sipping her coffee. And honestly, Thomas, I think you and Zara could use some father-daughter time. Dad seemed distracted as they drove down the winding road that led from the farmhouse into Pine Creek. He kept tapping his fingers on the steering wheel and checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. Are you nervous? Zara asked. Dad gave a small laugh. Is it that obvious? I haven't been back to Pine Creek since I left for college. 20 years ago. Did you hate it here? Not hate. But I always felt like an outsider. Like there was something people weren't telling me. He glanced at her. Makes more sense now, doesn't it? The town of Pine Creek was tiny. Just a single main street with a handful of stores, a bank, a post office, a small grocery, a hardware store, and a diner called Millie's that had a blinking open sign in the window. Hungry? Dad asked, parking in front of the diner. Inside, Millie's was like stepping back in time. Red vinyl, booths lined the walls, and a jukebox played old country music in the corner. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. As soon as they walked in, conversations stopped. Heads turned. Zara felt people staring at them. A gray-haired waitress approached, coffee pot in hand. She studied Dad's face for a long moment. "You're Eloise Winters' boy, aren't you?" she asked, her voice warm with surprise. "You look just like her." Dad nodded, uncomfortable under her gaze. "Yes, I'm Thomas Winters." The waitress smiled. "I remember you when you were knee-high to a grasshopper. I'm Doris. Used to babysit you sometimes when your mama worked late at the library." She turned to Zara. "And who might this young lady be?" "I'm Zara," she said. "His daughter." Something flashed in Doris's eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or surprise. She patted Zara's shoulder. "Well, aren't you the spitting image? Welcome to Pine Creek." She led them to a booth by the window. "We all wondered if you'd ever come. Back after everything." "After what?" Zara asked, seizing the opening. But Doris just smiled mysteriously and went to get coffee for Dad and hot chocolate for Zara. As they studied their menus, Zara noticed an old man at a corner table watching them. He sat alone, his gnarled hands curled around a coffee mug. His eyes never left Dad's face. "That man is staring at us," Zara whispered. Dad glanced over, then quickly looked away, probably just curious about newcomers. Small towns are like that. They ordered pancakes and eggs. While they waited for their food, Zara noticed more people entering the diner. Each one would pause, look their way, then whisper to whoever they were with. "I feel like we're in a fishbowl," she murmured. The bell over the door jingled, and an elderly couple walked in. The woman gasped audibly when she saw Dad, clutching her husband's arm. They chose a table as far from Zara and Dad as possible but kept sneaking glances. "Okay, this is weird," Dad admitted. Their food arrived, but before they could start eating, the old man from the corner table stood up. Using a wooden cane, he made his way slowly to their booth. "Don't mean to interrupt your breakfast," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "But you're Thomas Winters, ain't you?" Dad nodded warily. "Yes, sir." The old man studied him with watery blue eyes. "You're the spitting image of both of them," he said finally. "Got your mama's eyes and Ellis's chin." Dad's fork clattered against his plate. "You knew Ellis?" The old man's bushy eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Knew him? Ellis Mackley was my best friend growing up. Until the accident, of course." Zara kicked Dad under the table. This was Ellis, the person in the letters. Dad's face had gone pale. "Can you tell me about him? About Ellis Mackley?" The old man started to respond, but Doris hurried over and whispered urgently in his ear. He frowned, then nodded reluctantly. "Another time, perhaps," he said to Dad. "Enjoy your breakfast." He shuffled back to his table, leaving Dad and Zara staring after him. "Did you hear that?" Zara whispered excitedly. "Ellis Mackley. We have a last name now." "And apparently, I have his chin," Dad said, touching his face like he'd never seen it before. They ate quickly, aware of the eyes on them. When they finished, Dad paid the bill and they stepped out onto the sidewalk. "That was so weird," Zara said. "Why was everyone acting so strange? And why did Doris stop that man from talking to us?" "I don't know," Dad replied, "but I intend to find out." They spent the next hour walking through town. Dad pointed out places from his childhood. the elementary school he attended, the park where he played baseball, the library where his mother had worked. "Grandma Eloise was a librarian?" Zara asked. Dad nodded. "For almost 40 years. She loved books more than people, I used to think. Everywhere they went, people stared. Some nodded politely. Others crossed to the opposite side of the street to avoid them. It's like they're afraid of us," Zara said. "Or afraid of something." Back at the car, Dad checked his phone. Mom texted, "She found some things in the basement she wants me to look at." As they drove back to the farmhouse, Zara spotted a small cemetery on a hill overlooking the town. "Dad, did Grandma Eloise have a funeral here?" "No," he said. "She didn't want one. She was cremated, and I scattered her ashes in her rose garden, like she asked." "What about your dad? I mean, Gerald. Is he buried there?" Dad nodded, "along with his parents and my mother's parents. All the old Pine Creek families are buried there." "Is Ellis there too?" "If there was an accident." Dad's hands tightened on the wheel. "I don't know. But that's a good question." When they returned to the farmhouse, Mom greeted them with excitement. "You won't believe what I found in the basement," she said, leading them to the kitchen table. "A whole box of old newspapers. They're from the year you were born, Thomas. I thought you might want to keep them." Dad picked up the top newspaper and froze. The front page headline read, "Local man still missing after river accident." Beneath, it was a photo of a young man with a bright smile and familiar blue eyes. The caption identified him as Ellis Mackley, age 22. Dad and Zara exchanged a look. The secret letters had led them to a disappeared man and a decades-old mystery. And somewhere in this small town, people knew the truth. "Thomas, are you okay?" Mom asked, noticing Dad's pale face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Dad's hands shook slightly as he set down the newspaper. "Just surprised to see some old news, that's all." "Do you remember this?" Mom pointed to the headline about Ellis Mackley. "No," Dad said quickly. "I was just a baby when this happened." Mom looked at the photo of Ellis. "Handsome guy. Wonder what happened to him?" "Probably drowned," Dad said, his voice tight. "That's usually how these river accidents end." "There are more papers in the box if you want to look through them," Mom said. "I need to finish the kitchen." As soon as Mom left, Dad pulled the newspaper closer. "Ellis Mackley, age 22, he read softly. "Pine Creek resident missing and presumed dead after his canoe was found capsized downstream. Search efforts continue." "He looks like you," Zara whispered, studying the grainy photo. Dad nodded. "And according to the old man at the diner, I have his chin." His fingers traced the outline of his jaw thoughtfully. They spent the afternoon sorting through the box of old newspapers, looking for more stories about Ellis. They found a follow-up article a week later reporting that the search had been called off, but no body had been found. A small piece 2 months after that mentioned a memorial service. "Everyone thought he was dead," Dad said, "except Grandma Eloise." "What do you mean?" "Remember the letters? She wrote like she thought he was still alive somewhere, like he might come back someday." That evening, after dinner, Mom announced she was going to take a long bath and then call her sister. "I might be on the phone for a while," she said, yawning. "Don't wait up." As soon as the bathroom door closed and they heard water running, Dad turned to Zara. "Let's look at that journal now." They retrieved the wooden chest from Grandma Eloise's bedroom and took it to the living room. Dad lifted out the small leather-bound journal, handling it carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. "You read it," he said, passing it to Zara. "I'm not sure I can." Zara settled on the floor beside the softly glowing lamp and opened the journal. The first page had just one line, written in the same neat handwriting as the letters. "Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone." She turned the page and began to read aloud in a hushed voice. June 15th, 1983. I met a boy today. His name is Ellis Mackley, and he has the bluest eyes I've ever seen. He's working at the gas station for the summer. Dad would be furious if he knew I'd spoken to him. The Mackleys are the wrong sort of people, according to him. But Ellis doesn't seem wrong to me. He seems like the most right person I've ever met. Dad closed his eyes, listening intently. Zara continued reading. The journal told the story of a secret summer romance. 19-year-old Eloise was home from college. Ellis was the son of the town drunk, working multiple jobs to save for community college. They met in secret, by the river, in the back of the library after hours, once even in the town cemetery where they were sure no one would see them. July 28, 1983. Ellis kissed me tonight. We were by the old cedar tree near the river. He carved our initials into the trunk, E+E. He talks about leaving Pine Creek, about us building a life somewhere else, somewhere people wouldn't judge him by his father's mistakes, somewhere we could just be Ellis and Eloise, not a Mackley, and a Winters. The entries grew more passionate as summer turned to fall. Eloise wrote about defying her parents to see Ellis, about the future they planned together. October 3rd, 1983. I'm pregnant. Ellis is overjoyed. He got down on one knee right there in the middle of the woods and proposed with a ring that belonged to his grandmother. It's a simple band with a tiny stone, but I've never seen anything more beautiful. We're going to leave Pine Creek next week. Ellis has a cousin in New Jersey who can get him work at a factory. We'll be married by Christmas. Zara paused, looking up at her father. You were the baby. Dad nodded, his eyes shining with tears. Keep going. October 5th, 1983. Dad found out. I don't know how. He was waiting when I got home from meeting Ellis. I've never seen him so angry. He called me terrible names, said I'd ruined the family name. Then he said something that chilled my blood. He said he'd spoken to Sheriff Davis, and if Ellis didn't leave town by morning, they'd arrest him for stealing from the gas station. A false accusation that would follow him forever. Dad said he'd make sure Ellis spent years in prison. Sanada Bars, 6, 1983. I told Ellis about Dad's threat. He was furious, said we should leave tonight instead of waiting. But then Dad came to the gas station. I don't know what he said to Ellis, but when Ellis came to meet me later, he was different. Quiet. He said we needed to wait another day, that he had a plan. I'm scared. Dad is capable of anything when it comes to protecting the Winters name. The next entry was dated 2 days later, the handwriting shaky and uneven. October 8th, 1983. Ellis is gone. They say his canoe capsized in the river during last night's storm. But I know Ellis. He was an expert swimmer, grew up on that river. This was no accident. I don't know what happened, but I know my father was involved. What have I done? Ellis is gone, and it's all my fault. Zara's voice faltered. Dad reached for the journal and gently closed it. That's enough for tonight. But there's more, Zara protested. I know. But I need time to process this. Dad's voice was thick with emotion. All these years, I thought Gerald Winters was my father. I never questioned it. Grandma Eloise thought Ellis might still be alive, Zara reminded him, or hoped he was. Dad sighed heavily. I need to find out what really happened that night. And the person who would know is my grandfather, Eloise's father. Is he still alive? Dad shook his head. He died when I was 10, but his best friend was Sheriff Davis, the same sheriff mentioned in the journal. And, if I remember correctly, he's still around. Everyone in Pine Creek called him Old Sheriff Davis, even though he retired decades ago. From the bathroom, they heard water draining from the tub. Mom would be out soon. We'll go back to town tomorrow, Dad whispered, putting the journal back in the wooden chest. I need answers, Zara. I need to know who I really am. As they got ready for bed, Zara thought about the journal entries. Grandma Eloise had been just 19 when she'd fallen in love with Ellis Mackley, only a little older than Zara was now. Her whole life had changed because of that love, and because of whatever had happened that stormy night by the river. Had Ellis really drowned, or was there more to the story? The next morning, Zara woke early, her mind still swimming with questions about Ellis Mackley and Grandma Eloise. She found her dad in the kitchen, already dressed and nursing a cup of coffee. "Morning, Zara Bear," he said, using her childhood nickname. "Sleep okay?" She shrugged. "Kept thinking about the journal." "Me too." Dad glanced toward the stairs. "Mom's still asleep. I told her we need to go back into town today to pick up some moving boxes from the hardware store. But I want to check out the library too. That's where Mom worked most of her life. Maybe someone there remembers her." And Ellis. They left a note for Mom and drove into Pine Creek. The morning was bright and clear, the kind of spring day that made everything look fresh and new, even an old town like this, the Pine Creek Public. Library was housed in a small Victorian building at the end of Main Street. It had a stone staircase leading up to heavy wooden doors and stained glass windows that threw colorful patterns onto the front steps. "It's prettier than I expected," Zara said as they climbed the stairs. "Mom loved this place," Dad replied. "She always said books were more reliable than people." Inside, the library was cool and quiet. The smell of old books filled the air. A gray-haired woman sat at the front desk, arranging a display of new arrivals. Her name tag read, "Ms. Pearson, Head Librarian." She looked up as they approached, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Can I help you find something?" "Actually," Zara said, stepping forward, "I'm looking for information about someone who used to live here. His name was Ellis Mackley." Ms. Pearson's hands froze mid-motion. She peered at Zara over her glasses, then shifted her gaze to Dad. Something like recognition dawned in her eyes. "And why would a young girl like you be asking about Ellis Mackley?" she asked carefully. "I'm Eloise Winter's granddaughter," Zara explained. "We're cleaning out her house." The librarian's expression softened immediately. "Eloise's granddaughter? My goodness." She studied Zara's face intently. "You have her eyes? You know, those same curious eyes that never missed a thing." She stood and came around the desk. "I'm Margaret Pearson. I worked with your grandmother for over 30 years. She turned to Dad. "And you must be Thomas. Eloise talked about you constantly. She was so proud." Dad smiled awkwardly. "Thank you. Did you know her well?" "As well as anyone, I suppose." Eloise kept to herself mostly, devoted to her work and to you. Ms. Pearson hesitated. "And you're asking about Ellis Mackley. That's a name I haven't heard spoken in this library for many years." "Did you know him?" Zara asked eagerly. Ms. Pearson nodded slowly. "Everyone knew. Everyone back then. Ellis was a few years younger than me. A bright young man. Such a shame what happened." "The accident," Dad said. "Yes, the accident." Something flickered in Ms. Pearson's eyes. "Come with me. If you want to know about Ellis, this is where to start." She led them through the main reading room to a door marked Local Archives. Inside was a small room lined with filing cabinets and shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Pine Creek has kept community records going back 100 years, Ms. Pearson explained, pulling a set of keys from her pocket. Yearbooks, newspaper clippings, town council minutes, birth and death records. If you want to know about Ellis, this is where to look. She unlocked a cabinet and pulled out several high school yearbooks. Start here. These are from when Ellis and Eloise were students. Zara and Dad spent the next hour going through the yearbooks. In one from 1979, they found a photo of a teenage Ellis Mackley with a bright smile and confident posture. The caption read, "Ellis Mackley, track team captain, senior class vice president." On the next page was a photo of a serious-looking girl with long, dark hair. Eloise Winters, valedictorian, science club president. They were both so bright, Miss Pearson said softly, watching them from the doorway. Everyone thought they'd leave this town behind for bigger things. Neither one did. She helped them find newspaper articles about the accident that took Ellis's life. According to the reports, his canoe had capsized during a sudden storm. The sheriff's department conducted a search for 3 days before declaring him presumed dead. Some people thought it wasn't an accident, Ms. Pearson whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear, even in the empty library. "What do you mean?" Dad asked. Ms. Pearson hesitated. There were rumors. Ellis was an excellent swimmer, grew up on that river, and he and Eloise had been seen together, despite her father's disapproval. Herbert Winters was a powerful man in this town. He didn't like his college-educated daughter spending time with the son of the town drunk. "You think our great-grandfather had something to do with Ellis's disappearance?" Zara asked, her voice hushed. Ms. Pearson's eyes widened. "I didn't say that. And you shouldn't either. Not in this town. The Winters family still has influence. Here." She straightened some papers nervously. "I've probably said too much already." Just then, Zara's phone buzzed with a text from her mom. "Where are you? Come back to the house now." She showed it to Dad. "We need to go," he said, standing quickly. "Thank you for your help, Miss Pearson." As they gathered their things, the librarian disappeared into a back room. She returned moments later with something in her hand. "Your grandmother gave me this for safekeeping years ago," she said, pressing a faded photograph into Zara's palm. "I think she'd want you to have it now." Zara looked down at the photo. It showed a young Eloise and Ellis sitting together under a tree, their heads tilted toward each other, smiling. They looked happy and in love. "When was this taken?" Dad asked, looking over Zara's shoulder. "Summer of '83, I believe." "Not long before..." Ms. Pearson trailed off. "Before the accident," Dad finished. Ms. Pearson gave him a long look. "Just be careful asking questions around town. Some secrets are buried deep for a reason." As they hurried back to the car, Zara clutched the photograph. "She's warning us," she said. "People don't want us digging into what happened to Ellis." "Which makes me want to dig even more," Dad replied, starting the engine. "If Ellis Mackley is my father, I have a right to know what happened to him." The drive back to the farmhouse was tense, with both of them wondering what had prompted Mom's urgent text. As they pulled into the driveway, they saw a strange truck parked beside Mom's car. "Who's that?" Zara asked. Dad squinted. "I think it's the old man from the diner, the ETT one who knew Ellis." Sure enough, as they approached the house, they found Mom in the living room talking with the elderly man Zara had seen at Millie's diner the day before. Up close, his weathered face was kind, with deep wrinkles around his blue eyes. He leaned heavily on a wooden cane. "Thomas, Zara, this is Mr. Harlow," Mom said. He stopped by to pay his respects. "He was just telling me about the old cedar tree down by the river." Mr. Harlow turned to Zara. "You've been asking questions about Ellis Mackley, young lady. The answers you're looking for might be at the old tree where he and your grandma used to meet." Zara and Dad exchanged a quick glance. How did Mr. Harlow know they were asking about Ellis? "News travels fast in Pine Creek," the old man said, as if reading their thoughts. "Especially when it involves the Winters family. And you two made quite an impression at Millie's yesterday." "You knew Ellis Mackley?" Dad asked, sitting down across from him. Mr. Harlow nodded, his weathered hands tightening around the handle of his cane. "Ellis was my nephew, my sister's boy." Zara's eyes widened. If Ellis was really Dad's father, that would make Mr. Harlow his great-uncle. "What can you tell us about him?" Dad asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Good kid. Smart. Worked hard. Wasn't like his daddy." Mr. Harlow's eyes grew distant. "His father, my brother-in-law, was the town drunk. Mean as a snake when he'd been drinking. Ellis took care of his mama, worked 3 jobs some summers. And he was in love with my mother," Dad said. Mr. Harlow's gaze sharpened. "So you know about that?" "We found letters and a journal." Mom looked confused. "Thomas, what's going on? What letters?" Before Dad could answer, Mr. Harlow stood up. "I didn't come here to stir up trouble, just to give my condolences about Eloise. She was a fine woman, carried a heavy burden all her life." "The burden of what happened to Ellis?" Zara asked. Mr. Harlow regarded her thoughtfully. "You're a sharp one, just like your grandma." He turned to Dad. "If you want answers, go to the cedar tree, the big one down by the river bend. That's where they used to meet." After Mr. Harlow left, Mom turned to Dad, hands on her hips. "What was that all about? What letters? And why are you two asking around town about some man who died 40 years ago?" Dad took a deep breath. "It's a long story, Kate. And I'm not sure I understand all of it myself yet." He glanced at Zara. "We found my mother's journal. It suggests that Ellis Mackley might have been my father, not Gerald Winters." Mom sat down heavily. "What? That's quite a bombshell, Thomas." "I know, and I need to understand what happened. Mr. Harlow mentioned the cedar tree. I want to check it out." Mom shook her head. "This is a lot to process. Maybe we should focus on finishing the packing. We only have 1 more day." "This is important." "Mom," Zara interjected, "Dad needs to know the truth about his past." After some discussion, they agreed that Mom would continue packing while Dad and Zara explored the property. "Just be back before dark," Mom insisted, "and be careful by the river. The banks can be steep." Armed with a small shovel from the garden shed and Zara's phone flashlight, they set off across the back fields of the farm. The property was larger than Zara had realized, with rolling hills and patches of woods. In the distance, they could see the silver ribbon of the river winding through a valley. "My mother used to take me fishing down there when I was little," Dad said as they walked. "But we always went to the fishing dock on the east side, never to this part of the river." They followed a narrow path that cut through tall grass. The May sunshine warmed their backs, and birds called from nearby trees. Under other circumstances, it would have been a pleasant hike. "What do you think we'll find at the cedar tree?" Zara asked. Dad shrugged. "No idea. Maybe nothing." But Mr. Harlow seemed to think it was important. After about 20 minutes, they reached the river. It wasn't large, maybe 30 feet across, but the current looked swift and strong. The path led them along the bank until they came to a bend where the river widened into a calm pool. And there stood the cedar tree. It was massive, far older than the other trees around it, with a trunk so wide that Zara couldn't have wrapped her arms even halfway around it. Its branches stretched out over the water, creating a shady refuge on the bank. "This must be it," Dad said quietly. They approached the tree with a sense of reverence. This was where Eloise and Ellis had met in secret all those years ago, where they had fallen in love and made plans for a future together, plans that were never realized. "Look for their initials," Dad suggested. The journal mentioned Ellis carved them into the trunk. Zara circled the huge tree slowly, examining the bark. On the side facing the river, she found it, a heart with E+E carved inside. The carving was weathered and partially grown over, but still visible after all these years. "Here," she called. Dad joined her, running his fingers gently over the carved letters. E+E, Ellis and Eloise. As he traced the carving, Zara noticed something else. A small arrow scratched beneath the heart, pointing downward toward the roots of the tree. "Dad, look at this arrow. Do you think it means something?" Dad knelt to examine it. "Maybe they buried something here? A time capsule or a memento?" "Let's dig and find out," Zara suggested, already grabbing the small shovel. The ground around. The tree was soft from recent rains. Dad began to dig at the spot where the arrow pointed, while Zara held her phone flashlight. After a few minutes, his shovel struck something solid with a dull clank. "There's something here," he said, digging more carefully now. Gradually, they uncovered a small metal box, about the size of a thick paperback book. It was rusted but intact, the lid secured with a simple latch. "It's locked, isn't it?" Zara asked, in disappointment. Dad tried the latch. To their surprise, it opened easily. Not locked, just stiff. Inside the box, cushioned on what looked like an old handkerchief, was a man's silver pocket watch, its chain coiled neatly beside it. Dad lifted it out carefully. The watch face was yellowed with age. The hands stopped at 11:17. Beneath the watch was a sealed envelope, the paper discolored with age, but protected from the worst effects of time by the waterproof box. It was addressed, in Grandma Eloise's familiar handwriting, "My son." Dad's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the envelope. "It's dated just 2 months before Mom died." "Open it," Zara urged. Carefully, Dad broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. He began to read aloud. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, then you've found the key and begun to uncover the truth. There are things I never had the courage to tell you in person. The most important is that Ellis Mackley was your father, and he didn't die in the river that night." Before Dad could read more, they heard Mom calling from the direction of the house. They'd been gone longer than they realized. "Thomas! Zara! Where are you? Dinner's ready." Dad quickly folded the letter and put everything back in the metal box. "We need to go, but we'll come back first thing tomorrow and finish reading this." As they hurried back toward the house, Zara's mind raced. If Ellis Mackley hadn't died in the river accident, what had happened to him? And where had he been all these years? The mystery was deepening, with each answer revealing new questions. But one thing was becoming clear. Grandma Eloise had wanted them to find the truth. She had left clues for them like breadcrumbs leading through a forest, and Zara was determined to follow them to the end. That night, a storm hit Pine Creek. Rain lashed against the windows of the old farmhouse, and thunder shook the walls. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Zara's makeshift bed in the living room with brief bursts of ghostly light. She couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the words from Grandma Eloise's letter. "Ellis Mackley was your father, and he didn't die in the river that night. If Ellis hadn't died, where had he been all these years? Why had he never come back for Eloise and their son? And if he was still alive, could he be somewhere nearby? Dad had hidden the metal box in his suitcase. After dinner, he'd pulled Zara aside and whispered that they would finish reading the letter in the morning before Mom woke up. But morning felt years away. Outside, the storm grew fiercer. Wind howled around the eaves of the old house, and rain drummed on the roof like impatient fingers. Zara pulled her sleeping bag up to her chin, trying to get comfortable on the living room floor. A sudden flash of lightning, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder, made her jump. The storm was directly overhead now. That's when she heard it. The sound of a car engine, barely audible over the storm. Headlights swept across the living room wall as a vehicle turned into the driveway. Who would be visiting in the middle of a storm at... Zara checked her phone, 12:17 a.m.? She crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out an old blue pickup truck, its headlights cutting through the downpour. The truck sat idling in the driveway for several minutes, as if the driver was debating whether to get out. Finally, the headlights went off, and a tall figure emerged from the truck. The person wore a rain jacket with the hood pulled up, obscuring their face. They stood in the rain for a long moment, just staring at the house. Zara's heart pounded. Should she wake her parents? Call for help? The figure slowly approached the porch steps. Zara expected them to knock on the door, but instead, the person simply stood there in the rain, looking up at the windows of the house. A flash of lightning revealed an elderly man with a weathered face, mostly hidden by the hood of his jacket. "Who are you looking at?" a voice whispered behind her. Zara nearly screamed. She whirled around to find her dad standing there in his pajamas. "Someone's outside," she whispered back. An old man in a blue truck. Dad joined her at the window. They watched as the man on the porch turned and looked directly at their window, as if he knew they were watching. His face was in shadow, but something about his posture, straight-backed and dignified despite his apparent age, seemed familiar. "Go back to bed, Zara," Dad whispered, his voice strange and tight. "But who is that?" she asked, before Dad could answer. The man on the porch turned and walked back to his truck. He didn't hurry, despite the pouring rain. He moved with purpose, like someone who had accomplished what they came to do. The blue truck backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the road, its taillights glowing red through the rain like distant embers. "I think," Dad said in a voice filled with wonder and uncertainty. "That might have been Ellis Mackley." "What?" Zara gasped. "Are you sure?" Dad shook his head. "No, I couldn't see his face clearly. But who else would come here in the middle of the night during a storm just to look at the house?" They stayed by the window for a long time, watching the empty driveway, but the blue truck didn't return. Eventually, Dad went back to bed, but Zara remained awake, listening to the storm gradually move away. The thunder became more distant, the lightning less frequent. Finally, near dawn, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. She dreamed of the cedar tree by the river. In her dream, a young man and woman stood beneath its branches, holding hands and laughing. They looked up as Zara approached, and she saw that the young woman was Grandma Eloise. The young man had familiar blue eyes, Dad's eyes. Zara woke to bright sunlight streaming through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. For a moment, she wondered if the midnight visitor had been part of her dream. But when she stepped onto the front porch to get some fresh air, she found something that hadn't been there the day before. A small wooden bird, expertly carved from dark wood, sitting on the top step. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The craftsmanship was incredible, each feather detailed with loving precision. On the bottom, someone had carved a message: "The fishing cabin. Noon tomorrow." Zara rushed inside to show her dad, who was making coffee in the kitchen. "I found this on the porch," she said, holding out the wooden bird. "Look at the message." Dad examined the carving with trembling hands. It was him. It had to be. "The fishing cabin," Zara read again. "What fishing cabin?" "There's an old cabin on the edge of what used to be Winter's property, down by Beaver Pond," Dad explained. "I remember going there a few times as a kid. But Mom always seemed uncomfortable there. She'd never stay long." "Do you think that's where Ellis has been all these years?" Zara asked. "Living in a cabin so close?" Dad shook his head. "I don't know. But we're going to find out tomorrow." Mom walked into the kitchen, yawning. "Find out what tomorrow?" Dad and Zara exchanged a look. "Mom," Dad said, taking a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you about my father. My real father." Mom looked confused. "What do you mean, your real father?" "Gerald Winters was your father." "I thought so too. But I've found evidence that suggests otherwise." Dad placed the wooden bird on the kitchen table and sat down. "Kate, please sit. This is going to take a while." Over breakfast, Dad and Zara told Mom everything: the wooden chest, the hidden key, the letters, the journal entries, and finally, the message on the carved bird. Mom listened without interrupting, her coffee growing cold in her mug. When they finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "You believe this man, Ellis Mackley, is still alive? And that he's your biological father?" she finally asked. Dad nodded. "I do. And I think he wants to meet us. Tomorrow at the fishing cabin." "This is a lot to process, Thomas." Mom reached across the table and took his hand. "Are you sure you want to do this? What if it's not what you hope? What if he's not who you think?" "I need to know," Dad said simply. "I've spent my whole life feeling like a piece of me was missing. Maybe this is why." Mom squeezed his hand. "Then we'll go together. All of us." The rest of the day was tense with anticipation. They continued packing up the house, their final day before the new owners would take possession. But their minds were elsewhere. Dad was quiet and distracted. Twice, Zara caught him staring at his reflection in the hallway mirror, as if searching for traces of Ellis Mackley in his own face. That night, none of them slept well. Zara dreamed again of the cedar tree. But this time, an old man stood beside it, his face in shadow. He held out his hand to her, but no matter how fast she ran toward him, she couldn't reach him. Morning dawned clear and warm. By 11:30, they were in the car, following a narrow dirt road that wound through the pine woods on the edge of what had once been Winter's family land. "Are you nervous?" Zara asked from the back seat. Dad nodded, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Terrified." "It'll be okay," Mom said, though her voice sounded uncertain. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." The road ended at a small clearing. A weathered sign read, "Beaver Pond," in faded letters. They could see the glint of water through the trees. "We walk from here," Dad said, parking the car. They followed a narrow trail through dense pines. The air smelled of resin and warm earth. Birds called overhead, and once, a rabbit darted across their path. After about 10 minutes, the trees opened up to reveal a small pond, its surface sparkling in the midday sun. On the far side stood a rustic cabin. It was small but well-maintained, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney despite the warm day. Someone was waiting for them. As they approached, the cabin door opened. An old man stepped onto the porch. He was tall and straight-backed, with silver hair and weathered skin deeply tanned from years in the sun. Despite his age, he had to be in his 80s. He moved with strength and purpose, and his eyes, clear, blue eyes that mirrored Dad's exactly, widened at the sight of them. "Thomas," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You came." Dad stopped a few feet from the porch steps. "Are you Ellis Mackley?" The old man nodded slowly. "I am." "And you're my son?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Zara watched as the two men stared at each other, seeing the obvious resemblance between them. Dad had Ellis's eyes, his square jawline, his tall frame. Even the way they stood was similar. Shoulders back, chin up, as if ready to face whatever came next. Mom squeezed Zara's shoulder, a silent reminder that they were witnessing something momentous. "Please," Ellis finally said, gesturing to the porch. "Come inside. I've been waiting a long time for this day." The inside of the cabin was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small fire keeping away the spring chill. Bookshelves lined another wall, packed with well-worn volumes. A wooden table held the remains of a solitary breakfast. "You live here?" Dad asked, looking around. "Not all the time," Ellis replied. "I have a small house in Riverdale, about 50 miles from here. But I come to the cabin often. It's peaceful, and it's close to—" He paused. "Close to where my heart has always been." They sat at the wooden table. Ellis poured coffee for the adults and juice for Zara from a pitcher that had been waiting. "You're Eloise's granddaughter," he said to Zara. "You have her spirit. I can see it in your eyes." "How? Did you know we'd found the key?" she asked. "And the letters?" Ellis smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I've watched over your family from a distance for many years. When Eloise passed, I knew someday you might come to clean out the house. I hoped you'd find what she left for you." "Why didn't you ever come forward?" Dad asked, his voice tight with 40 years of absence. "If you're my father, why did you let me grow up believing Gerald Winters was my dad?" Ellis's smile faded. He looked down at his gnarled hands folded on the table. "It's a long story, son. One I'm not proud of." He took a deep breath. "Eloise and I were in love. When she got pregnant, we planned to run away together. But her father found out. Herbert Winters was a powerful man in Pine Creek. He threatened to have me arrested on false charges if I didn't disappear. Said he'd make sure I spent years in prison." "So you faked your drowning," Dad said. Ellis nodded. "I left clues that would make it look like my canoe had capsized. I thought Eloise would realize what I'd done. We had a plan, you see. She was supposed to meet me here at this very cabin 2 days later. We'd start a new life somewhere else, with new names. But she never came," Mom said softly. "No, she never came." Ellis's voice was heavy with old sorrow. "I waited a week. Then I heard she'd gone back to college, and I assumed—" His voice broke. "I assumed she'd chosen a different life, a better life than a fugitive existence with me. She thought you were dead," Dad said. "She mourned you her whole life." Ellis looked up sharply. "What?" "The letters," Dad explained. "She wrote to you for decades, but never mailed them. She thought you had drowned in the river." Ellis's hands trembled as Dad pulled the stack of letters from his jacket pocket. "All these years," he whispered. "We both thought the other had moved on." "Why did you stay away even after her parents died?" Mom asked. "Even after Gerald died?" "Ellis, opened a drawer in the table and pulled out dozens of unsent letters of his own, yellowed with age. "Same reason she never sent hers, I reckon," he said softly. Fear. Shame. The feeling that too much time had passed to make things right. He looked at Dad. "And by then, you were grown. You had a life. I didn't want to turn your world upside down with the truth." "But you're here now," Zara said. "You left us the wooden bird." Ellis smiled at her. "Because it's time. Eloise is gone, and the truth can finally come out." He turned to Dad. "I've missed so much of your life, Thomas. I can never get those years back. But if you're willing, I'd like to be part of whatever time we have left." Dad was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and placed his hand over Ellis's weathered one. "I think," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that I'd like that too." On their final day at the farmhouse, Ellis came to help them finish packing. He arrived early, driving the same blue truck Zara had seen during the storm. He brought donuts from Millie's Diner and coffee for the adults. It was strange at first, having this man who had been a mystery just days ago now helping them wrap dishes in newspaper and carry boxes to the moving truck. But as the hours passed, the awkwardness began to fade. Ellis and Dad spent most of the day talking, making up for a lifetime of absence. Zara noticed how alike they were, not just in looks, but in the way they laughed, the way they tilted their heads when thinking about something, even the way they both tapped their fingers against their legs when they were nervous. Mom watched them with a mixture of caution and warmth. "It's like seeing double sometimes," she whispered to Zara as they packed books from the living room shelves. "Your dad?" At different ages. By afternoon, they had emptied most of the house. The moving truck was packed, and only a few boxes remained. While the adults sorted through the last of Grandma Eloise's belongings in the basement, Zara felt drawn to the attic one last time. The space looked different now, empty and echoing without the trunks and furniture that had filled it before. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams coming through the round window. Zara walked the length of the attic, saying goodbye to the place where her journey had begun, with the discovery of the wooden chest. As she turned to leave, she noticed something she'd missed before, a loose floorboard near the window. It shifted, slightly, when she stepped on it. Curious, she knelt down and pried it up with her fingers. Beneath the floorboard was a small tin box. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age. Unlike the others, this one wasn't addressed to Ellis. It was addressed to my granddaughter. With trembling fingers, Zara opened it. "To the granddaughter I'll never meet," the letter began. "If you're reading this, you've found the key and unlocked more than just a wooden box. You've unlocked our family's truth." Grandma Eloise explained that she'd always known Zara would come someday. The dreams Zara had been having weren't just dreams. Somehow, across time, her grandmother had reached out to her. "I know this sounds impossible," Eloise wrote, "but some gifts run in families. My mother had it, I have it, and I suspect you do too. The ability to see beyond what others see, to sense things that are hidden. I've had dreams of you since before you were born. A girl with curious eyes who would someday find what I've hidden and bring our family back together." Zara's heart raced as she read. The silver-haired woman in her dreams, had that really been Grandma Eloise guiding her? The truth is both simpler and more complex than the stories you've been told, Eloise continued. "I made a terrible mistake, letting fear guide my life. I lost the man I loved and kept my son from his real father. Don't make my mistake, dear one. Don't let fear stop you from loving freely and speaking truth, no matter how difficult. At the bottom of the letter was a small hand-drawn map, marking a spot near the cedar tree, different from where they had already dug. "This is where the real treasure is," Eloise had written. Zara ran downstairs, the letter clutched in her hand. She found the adults in the kitchen, taking a break with cups of coffee. "Look what I found in the attic," she exclaimed, showing them the letter. Dad read it aloud, his voice growing more amazed with each paragraph. When he finished, Ellis's eyes were shining with tears. "She knew," he said softly. "Somehow, she knew you would find everything." "We need to check the spot on this map," Zara insisted. "Right now, before we leave." Together, the family went to the cedar tree. Following the map, they dug at a spot a few feet from where they'd found the metal box. Soon, Dad's shovel struck something solid. They uncovered a small waterproof container. Inside was a beautiful antique locket containing 2 photographs, a young Eloise on one side and Ellis on the other. They looked happy and in love, their whole lives ahead of them. Along with the locket was a note that simply read, "True love never dies. It just waits to be found again." Ellis held the locket in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. "I gave this to her on her 19th birthday," he said. "I saved for months to buy it. She wore it every day that summer." "She buried part of her heart here," Dad said, putting his arm around Ellis's shoulders. "With memories of you." Ellis nodded, unable to speak through his tears. "We can't change the past," Dad said gently, "but we still have time for the future." As they walked back to the house together, Dad and Ellis leading the way, with Mom and Zara following behind, Zara realized the key she had found had unlocked much more than an old wooden box. It had unlocked secrets kept for decades, healed old wounds, and brought together a family that had been broken apart by fear and misunderstanding. The real treasure hadn't been the locket or the watch or even the letters. It had been the truth and the chance to make things right while there was still time. Back at the house, as they prepared to leave Pine Creek behind, Ellis invited them to visit his home in Riverdale. "I don't have much," he said, "but I'd be honored if you'd come for dinner next Sunday. All of you." Dad looked at Mom, who nodded with a smile. "We'd like that." As they drove away from the farmhouse for the last time, Zara looked back at Ellis standing in the driveway, waving goodbye. He would follow them in his blue truck as far as the main road before turning toward Riverdale. "He seems nice," she said. "I'm glad we found him." Dad smiled, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Me too, Zara Bear. And it's all because of you. You found the key." Zara fingered the locket that Ellis had insisted she keep, now hanging around her neck. Inside were the photos of Eloise and Ellis, reunited at last. "It wasn't just me," she said softly. "Grandma Eloise helped. She left clues for us to follow." As they turned onto the main road, Zara had a strange feeling. A warmth, a presence beside her that wasn't quite physical. She turned to look out the window, and just for a moment thought she saw a reflection in the glass. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes smiling at her. Then the image was gone, leaving only Zara's own face looking back at her. But she understood then what Grandma Eloise had meant in her letter. Some gifts did run in families, and with that gift came a responsibility to use it wisely, to bring people together, to heal what had been broken. She was part of something larger now, a chain that stretched back through her father and grandmother and forward into her own future. all connected by love, by truth, and by the courage to find both, no matter how long they had been hidden. That's the end of our story. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Where are you listening from? I'd love to know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives me the motivation to create more stories like this one.